Oh, thank you very much, Tony. Tonight's subject is pure quarry. No concrete, no steel, no war history, pure quarry. So something different, I hope. I'm going to talk about work we've been doing for decades now, probably from my point of view, it dates back to the late 70s. Exploring and studying and looking at old, well, very old stoneworkings in East Surrey, which provided Reigate stone for several centuries. But the challenge has always been just exactly how old are these places, because dating evidence is very difficult to come by. And what I'm hoping to present tonight is really sort of a run through of what we learned, what we still don't know, and where we currently stand with our understanding of just how old the quarry workings are. So let's move through the slides and see what we got. This is the area we're talking about. This is the southernmost part of the M25. You can see snaking through the picture there, with the M23 cutting through from north to south. Reigate's the big grey blob on the left-hand side. I'm sure they love being described as a big grey blob, but there you go. And most of the quarries are really sort of like in that central strip from east to west, running through the map there. So I'll just move through and picture where they are. So there you see them all highlighted in red. Those are quarrying sites or mining sites in the upper greensand, which is the bed of stone that was excavated to provide Reigate stone. If you can see the blue line that's appeared at the top there, that is the current boundary of Chaldon parish. And as you can see, none of the red blobs are actually within the current boundaries of Chaldon. So if you want to understand why they're called the Chaldon quarries, you need to have a look to see where the parish boundary was before 1933 there. And immediately you can see a significant area of quarrying right across the southern end of the parish. It's quite unusual, Chaldon parish, and most downland parish boundaries seem to stop at the top of the hill. This is one of the few which comes down off the top of the hill and down into the lower ground to the south, almost certainly because that's where the valuable stone resource was. And so Chaldon Manor and whatever was included that area below the crest of the downs. So let's zoom into this particular area to show you what you have here. This is the first edition Ordnance Survey plan. And you can see on here, let me just draw on for you where it is. You can see that there's a wood there, there's a wood there, there's another one there. These are the old quarry pit entrances running through, all in a line, following the outcrop of the rock. So that's where the old quarry workings were as recorded first by the Ordnance Survey. And that is the result of the surveying work that was undertaken in the 1980s that show how they lie relative to the various entrance woods all along the outcrop. In that sort of browny squiggle, there is about 10 miles of open gallery, which is something like 16 to 17 kilometres. It took from 1980 till 1987 to survey, visiting, I suppose, on average once or twice a week. So what we're going to do now is have a look at some of the structures that we know have used Reigate stone, many of which in the historical records actually refer to Chaldon stone as opposed to Merstham or Reigate or something else. So the oldest structure that we currently aware of that contains significant quantities of Reigate stone is actually a Roman tile kiln, which was discovered in 2004 in the outskirts of Reigate and was then excavated, put into storage. A lot of it was put into storage, then donated to our society, the Wealden Cave and Mine Society, and we are nearly at the point of completing its reconstruction within the Reigate Caves for people to visit and see. And there's a little bit more display work to do, but it's by and large finished now. And within that structure, there's some very nice large blocks of Reigate stone, which I'll show you in a minute. Before that it came to light, we really weren't aware of any significant use of Reigate stone until after the conquest, the Norman conquest, because there are a couple of stone pits listed under the manor of Willey, which is part of the Limpsfield Manor, in 1086. So we knew there was something was being dug up then. And then you have to skip even further towards the current day by some way before you start finding significant structures that included it. And the oldest I'm aware of from the medieval standpoint, as you see, there's Chertsey Abbey. This is just into the 12th century. And then you've got Merton Priory, a very significant user of Reigate stone. And then London Bridge, 1176. But so far, no mention of Chaldon in the records. This is purely structures that contain Reigate stone or was bought from Reigate stone traders. The oldest documented quarry site is at Reigate, when the Earl of Surrey, called William Earl of Warren, gifted a quarry to the canons at Waltham in Essex, Waltham Abbey. And that was in 1218. Still no mention of Chaldon. And it's not until we get to the 13th century that that name starts to appear in the documentary records. And we have Westminster Palace in the building accounts of Henry III. Say what you will about being a monarchy, but the one thing that our monarchy has done is preserved centuries and centuries of records in their various parchment rolls and whatever, and their building accounts are part of that. And you can see here that Chaldon stone was popping up in the 13th century and was continued for a long time, at least 100 years. Windsor Castle, another major use of Reigate stone into the 14th century. These guys, the prophets, were the masters of quarries at Merstham and Chaldon. So we do know there were medieval quarries at Chaldon. That we can be sure of. Westminster Abbey, back to Westminster. There's a quarry rented at Chaldon for the construction of the abbey. Continued for many decades, and that, as you see, that didn't finish until the 14th century. And finally, we have this curious name, Norton's Quarry. Now, there's a Carew court roll, a local court, that refers to issues to do with, it's an incidental reference. So basically, someone was fined for letting their pigs graze on the public highway or something along those lines on the road to Norton's Quarry. It was that sort of reference. And you can tell from the context that this was almost certainly in the middle of that southern boundary running east-west along the southern end of Chaldon parish. So we think that there was this quarry called Norton's Quarry somewhere there. But as I say, pinning it down is a major challenge. So a few pics. This is the Roman kiln being excavated. If it's not obvious, let me just pull up the old drawing tool. I'll show you where the Reigate stone is. There's one block there, and there's another block there, and there's a couple more on the other side where this chap's standing over here. These are big blocks. They're squared, dressed, and we're obviously, this is proper quarrying. These aren't just lumps of stone that have been sort of picked out of a hole in the ground for no particular reason. The lower of the two that you can see there has got some what I call rustication dressing. So it's the sort of thing you'd expect to see in a major villa structure. That's from medieval standpoint, that is a very large block of stone, unusually large. Normally, later quarry workings would have taken out smaller stones than that. So these Romans were whipping out some massive, massive blocks. There's these four. Where are the rest? I can't believe they would have opened a quarry just for 4 blocks of stone. So there was a lot of Roman work going on somewhere. A lot of it may well have gone north to London. Again, we have absolutely no idea where the Roman quarries were. So we cannot be sure whether there was Roman work going on at Chaldon or not, not unless we find some interesting pots or coins, which we haven't yet. This is Westminster, a little bit of surviving Reigate stone at Westminster. This is off as a gateway into one of the courtyards off to one side of Westminster Abbey. So it's part of the Abbey complex. Inside that gateway, you can see there's this beautiful rib work here, which is running through here and across there. These are Reigate stone ribs. The stuff in between is clunch, I believe, which is basically chalk. Very, very badly decayed. It is seriously decayed. Those black lines you can see there, those are strips of lead which were poured into between the joints of the ribs as molten lead, and then obviously it solidified just to sort of bind the whole thing together. Those ribs of lead are now sticking out into thin air by at least an inch. They are seriously decayed. Mr. Harverson has asked whether the subterranean quarrying carried out by the Romans almost certainly was. It's very unlikely that they would have dug the stuff from the surface. Okay, next slide. That's Windsor. There's not a lot left, not a lot to see at Windsor of Reigate stone on the publicly accessible areas. I believe there's quite a lot of stuff in the private areas, like down in the sort of basements, and I found historical references to past princes of the realm being escorted into places in Windsor to see the old Reigate stone wells and all the rest of it, but nothing that the public can see. This is one of the few places where you can see it, and you can see how heavily restored it is with something else, Bath stone maybe, who knows. I wasn't that interested, I was more interested in the Reigate stone. So then we move on to, having covered, if you like, what you'd call the building evidence, we can now start looking at the archaeological evidence within the quarries themselves. Tim Wealden has asked, were those kiln blocks potentially recycled from prior building? Yes, that's indeed a possibility. The other option is that that large block that I mentioned, the big one that's got the rustications, actually got a huge crack right through the middle. It could have been quarried, dressed and broke. So, oh, bloody hell, I can't use this in our villa now. But those guys over at the tile kilns needed some stone. Let's see if they're interested. Who knows? So let's have a look at some archaeological finds. This is all a bit frustrating because, in fact, there's not a lot that's datable. There is some stuff, but it's not a lot. Here we have candle holders. These are fabricated from lumps of stone which are rounded, and then I assume they probably used a point of a pick to drill the hole through the middle to hold the candle. There's a clay one at the bottom there as well. Completely undatable. So of interest, but can't really date it. There's no topology for this stuff. This is the most common tool that gets found down there. These iron wedges that we used to split the blocks. All these are, I would potentially classify as discards. They're basically too short to be as effective as they should be, so the quarrymen just chucked them away. So they were probably significantly longer than shown here when new. Again, no easy way of dating them. There's no topology, there's no sort of datable carbon content really. So that's another one that we can say interesting, but okay, fine. This is the only pick that's been found in the whole of the Chaldon complex. Undated. It's more likely if you could work out how old the bit of the quarry that was found in was, you could date the pick rather than use the pick to date the quarry. So it's a catch-22. We don't know which way to go. So there's a rather nice mark on it. You can see in the middle of the pick, like a star, which is some kind of a identifying mark, I suspect, either the smith or the quarry owner. I suspect the quarry owner, but again, no way of knowing what it means or how old it is. I say a medieval spade, a spade. Can't say it's medieval, we don't know. It looks like a golf club, but it's not a club. It's a spade. What you have to imagine is that that long, thin, vertical bar on the right-hand side would have had an equivalent on the left-hand side, and the spade, the blade of the spade, if you like, would have been the central part, and then the iron would have been put there to protect the edges and to provide a cutting edge. And these would have been used for moving the quarry waste around or scraping mud off the floor. Again, there's no wood survived in this. There's nothing datable. I say nothing datable, but since I put this presentation together, I've been to the Museum of London, and on display there, one of their, I don't remember the excavation now, but I remember that it was, I believe, a 17th century excavation, 16th, 17th century, may have been earlier. They had something very much like this on display. A spade looked like this. But of course, who knows, that the same design of spade could have been used 200 years earlier and 200 years later. Any metal detecting being carried out? Not a lot. If anything, it should be discouraged because it has happened in the past, and we know we can see places where people have dug things up and we've lost the artifacts. So we don't do it. There's plenty of stuff around to find that we find for dating, and to be honest, I think it's a bit of a fruitless exercise. I don't think you'd find anything beyond what we've currently found. Oh, look, some datable artifacts. Well, these are called onion bottles, and they're not quarrymen's, well, they could be quarrymen's rubbish. They're more likely to have been brought in by casual visitors. These date from the early 1700s, and they were found in one particular area of the quarry. So definitely not medieval. And there's another onion bottle. Now these very much are datable. And as you can see, I've classified them as pre-1650. Unfortunately, that's still very, very wide date range. I'm no expert in dating horseshoes. You can buy Shire albums which give you some rough idea. You can look stuff up on the internet. My judgment, I can't remember the reasoning behind this, but I think it's because they have a feature or they don't have a feature which appeared around about 1650. So these are not, so they're useful. They're useful. They're old, and I've discovered in various artifact boxes which I've been presented with. Unfortunately, not provenanced. All I can tell you is they came from Chaldon. I don't know which bit of Chaldon, which have some interesting shapes. So I'm going to have to look those up next to see how old they are. Why are they called onion bottles? Because in cross-section, they are supposed to look like the cross-section of an onion, all fat and lumpy at the bottom and thin at the top. I mean, you could equally call them pear bottles, I suppose, but onion bottles is that's what people have called them. Here's some more horseshoes. These are half horseshoes. They're very odd. I say half horseshoes. They were misidentified as ox shoes when they were first found, but they're not. They've got a break along that top edge there, which shows that they snapped at the front, and which means that if you assume a symmetry to them, you can actually see what shape the hole was, if you like, the slot in the middle. That is eminently datable. That's that slot shape in the middle, whether it looks like a tongue or a keyhole or any number of other things. And that, my judgment, it puts them between 1550 and 1650. And the same for the ones on the right. There's some more horseshoes there. The one on the extreme right's a rather odd shape. The only reason I suspect that's a horseshoe is it's got holes for putting the nails through, but it's got a very strange pokey bit at the top there, which makes little sense. Then we get on to ox shoes. Ox shoes are. I started to try to find out whether there had anyone put together a topology for ox shoes, like there is for clay pipes, and it doesn't seem to be one. And then it struck me that if we could date the quarries, we could actually generate a the various sections of the quarries, but they can actually generate the typology of ox shoes and do it the other way around. But so far, that's not been possible. There are basically three sorts that we come, and they're all located in different parts of the workings. These appear to be some of the older designs. You'll notice they've got a rather sort of nice sort of forged shape to them, all sort of down this edge there or around there. They seem to have been deliberately shaped. Whether decorative or not, I don't know. It's just the fancy of the blacksmith. But the most important thing is the big hook at the front. And that hook is what provides a further anchor point for the shoe on the cloven hoof of an ox, because that hooked up over the sharp pointed toe of the ox, so they were less likely to fall off or get ripped off. It's also debatable whether each foot had two of these or just one on the outer edge. If you look into what people have researched with ox shoes, you find that some people say that they shod all four hooves. Some people say they only did the front one. Some people say they only did the outer part of the shoe and not the inside. So again, you do find the footprints, and it's I have to say that the only place, it's very rare to see anything more than half a hoof print, which suggests they may have been only putting the shoes on one half of the foot. So there we've got a date of we don't know what for that. And some more ox shoes. This is the other sort. These are the ones I call comma shoes because they look like an apostrophe. And these are associated with a datable passage. So these date from the sort of let's get this right, late 15th, early 16th century. Sorry, late 16th, early 17th century. So around about 1600s time. And there's some more hooked ones. Clay pipes. Everyone knows you can date clay pipes. I was luckily shown a collection by the late John Folding, who was one of the early explorers of the workings. And he let me have the time to sketch them and get some shapes from them. And you can see these are much more easy to date. Look how closely I believe they can be dated. So within 20 years or so, some of them. And these are late 17th century. And again, this is the same passage. This is why we know the date of that passage, where those onion bottles and the ox shoes are from. So those ox shoes are probably contemporary with these clay pipes. So you're talking 1600s. And there's a photo of one that's still down there. Most of the artifacts you're seeing were removed for safekeeping in the days before the NAMHO guidelines were forced out and respected by most responsible mine explorers. Things should be left where they are in context unless they are under threat. And that doesn't mean threat of losing access, that means threat of destruction. So this is still down there. It's in that same passage and is compatible with the ones that I just showed you. Again, same passage, later pipes. So these are casual visitors visiting the workings just after they closed, so 1720s to 50s. Nicely dated, compatible with the graffiti on the walls, which you'll see in a minute. There's a small bit of pot, which is sort of Bellarmine jar stuff. That's 17th century. I'll show you where a lot of this stuff is on the survey in a minute, so you can get a feel for how we've dated it. That's nice and datable because it's got an excise mark on it, which is Queen Anne. So there you go, 1702 to 14. So it's a Queen Anne tankard. And this I've only unfortunately seen drawings of, and this photograph. This is a jug which was found by members of the Croydon Caving Club in the 1970s. Very well recorded, very well researched, and that is mid 16th century. So we're coming back in time now. So that's the artifact finds. So now we can look at the inscription finds to see whether they tell us anything. This is our oldest easily datable artifact inscription, only because it says so what it is. It's 1609. And it is in script of the time. Go online and see if you can find some manuscript images from that time, and I guarantee you'll find handwriting just like this. So this is classic, good handwriting of the time. It's almost impossible to read now, but it's what it says. It's a rhyming couplet. 2 weeks before midsummer is the date. Lose not thy time, the loss of goods may wreck thee sore, but lost something we can't read times more. In other words, if you lose your possessions, that's pretty bad, but if you lose time, that's infinitely worse. Probably an invocation to get on with your bloody work. These are intriguing. There's a whole set of quarry faces that have been dated simply by the numbers that have been drawn onto each of them. Most of these look like modern numerals. There's 1 or 2 giveaways. The 6 and the 7 there are 2 of them. The style by which people write numbers has changed over the years, and this is fairly typically sort of 16th century writing, maybe 17th, but more 16th century. The reason for the quarry face numbering is another story. It could be someone was basically working out, he'd just taken a lease on the quarry, wanted to see how many workable quarry faces he had, and wanted to make a note of what was what, so he could direct people to go and work numbers 1 to 12, which have been worked because the numbers have disappeared. But 13 to 20 something are still there. These are even more intriguing. These are potentially, thanks Linda, distinctive 4 there, that's good. These are ritual protection marks, we believe. There's a lot of these. They happen to be in the same area as the numbered quarry faces, possibly even drawn with the same lump of chalk, who knows. There's a lot of these. A lot of them have been rubbed off by people mistakenly thinking they were modern root marks. But unfortunately, the nature of this stone is such that it's bloody difficult rubbing stuff off, even chalk. You can still see where the marks are. You can still see what shapes they were. This is one of the better ones. That's a pair of V's crossed, and is supposed to invoke the protection of the Virgin Mary from all the sinister, nasty things that might cause you harm. They were either used to keep nasty things in the mine to stop them coming out to the surface, or in this case, far more likely to keep them away from you working in your little bit of the quarry, to stop them coming in and affecting you from the disused bits to either side, the dark and mysterious unknowns. So yeah, there are a lot of these. A lot of them, they seem to occur around junctions where there might have been like a cool draft blowing in from the workings around the corner, which we don't know anything about and don't intend to go and find out. And here's I dragged it off the internet, Gov, honestly. This is just the sort of things that you might look for if you're looking for protection marks. So you've got sort of daisy wheels and crossed V's and upside down cross V's and one thing and another. Make a mental note of 1 or 2 of those, because we have some rather odd soot marks on the roof. There's a crossed V there. It's not that, possibly 2. One of them's easier to see than the other. That one there is a crossed V. So that's done with a candle on the ceiling, so it's looking straight up. Look at that funny looking thing. There's a couple of those. It's quite indistinct. It's quite difficult to make it out, but it's got possibly a daisy wheel, but it's got some side bits sticking out the side. I honestly don't know. This is something for a ritual protection mark talk rather than a how old are the Chaldon quarries talk. Where it's relevant is that these inscriptions, this kind of inscription, was done over a quite specific time span, and as you approach the age of enlightenment, so to speak, that less and less of this was done. And of course, the age of enlightenment reached the southeast far earlier than anywhere else in primitive England. Right. Some more inscriptions on the roof. This is Mr. RB trying to write RB 1699 on the ceiling and failing to do it properly twice. I challenge you, looking vertically upwards, and not that I'm recommending you do, but try to draw things the right way round when you're all twisted, doubled up, looking up at the ceiling rather than on the level. So he's got the R around the upside down and around the wrong way on the first one, and on the one on the right he's got his 6 around the wrong way. But there you go. But it's datable, 1699. Very nice too. Not such a good photo. This is a difficult thing to photograph. I really need to get back down or get someone to get some more of these. But these are the casual visitors to the workings after the systems seem to have been abandoned. And they are specific to date, like September 1723, and you get John Maynard and Robert Lewis and James Lewis, I think it is, at the top there, and some little bit of simple arithmetic. And there's a lot of this. There's quite a few places where you can see this. So once again, we're talking post-abandonment here, not working dates. These weird symbols seem to be contemporary with those names and dates, in that they're in the same area. They could be older, but probably not a lot older, because we believe this area was the last area to be worked in the 17th century. And those are, again, when we first researched these, they came up as Kabbalistic symbols. There's the classic Cretan maze, and a curved swastika underneath it. And again, they're ritual, whether they're ritual protection or ritual encouragement, I don't know, because it could be someone up, like the Dashwoods of this world over at West Wickham, up to funny things down the mines, who knows. Now we get into some science, so some proper science. We had, about the time that we were finding some interesting bits of quarry working, which had been left undisturbed until very recently, we came across some stuff that could be carbon dated, and there's a fund where you can get, you can win free carbon dating. So we thought we'll go for that. And so this appears to be a twig or a stick that had been used as a torch, and consequently it's all charred at the end. So we sent that away, see what that is, recorded it properly, sent that away, and we got the results back. And here we have them. So there's what's called the calibration curve, which is that sort of like, looks like a COVID infection curve going the wrong way, but that is a calibration curve for registering, for working out how old something is when you check how much radiocarbon it's got in it. Unfortunately, what you look for is the intersection of that red spike with the calibration curve, and you can see it intersects the line twice. So that gives you a very broad spread of dates, anywhere between before 1500 to after 1600. And then we found some more bits of charcoal. No idea what this was. This is just flecks of carbon charcoal just lying in the quarry waste. We sent that off. Oh, they were very kind. They identified the wood for us as well. The first one was a bit of yew, and this is a bit of oak. So that was sent off for dating, and it came back with a very similar result. Again, it's on that awkward bit of the calibration curve where it reverses, so you get a very broad spread of possible dates from pre-1500 to post-1600. So let's see if there's a pattern to all this dating. So the dates, so the onion bottles, there we go, they're out in the eastern end there. That's where those datable horseshoes were found, in this little spur that cuts down this bit there. That's a bit of old quarry that was cut off by a more recent bit of quarry. So the passage that swings off to the right of the survey there is the most recent section, and in driving that gallery they cut off that bit to the north. So that's the 1660 is your clay pipes. That's at that location there. That's the 1720s graffiti and funny symbols. All that's quite consistent, you know, with the last bit of the quarry cutting off a slightly older bit. The 1609 graffiti's there, so we're coming west now, and things are getting slightly older. That's where the numbered working faces and the ritual protection marks are. So into the 1500s now. There's the carbon dating results in that area there. You'll notice it's getting progressively older as we go west. Apart from that bit, that's the Tudor jug that the Croydon Caving Club found. Norton's Quarry, 1529. So somewhere in that lot is Norton's Quarry, but we don't know where. But that again is consistent with that central section being about that sort of time. So we're left with this bit at the western end. So let's have a look at that. So we're looking a bit at some other evidence which doesn't give us dates, but gives us a bit of relative dating, shall we say, rather than absolute dating. So you'll notice this section is the various bits of woodland. You've got the various entrances here coming in, 1, 2, 3 there, all different entrance pits. And you can see the galleries coming in from each of the entrances to work different bits of the quarry. Let's home in on this bit here, which is the interesting bit. So in here, you'll notice you've got a gallery coming in from the left, the western end, cutting across from just below the C5 in an easterly direction. And then you've got another gallery coming in from the east, from the eastern entrance, just up where it says D5, with the blue line through the middle of it. So coming in from opposite directions. And there's actually a third one that's cutting off the bottom right-hand corner of the gallery. So down here, there's a just get this passage here coming in from an entrance to at the bottom. What you can see on this gallery is how the later workings up by D5. So this one, oh God, sorry, I've got these horrible pop-ups coming up, messing up my screen. So you've got this D5 gallery coming in here that's cut off the working galleries here, which come down from this one here, and that this gallery there has also cut off the end of this little network here. So what you have is an older section there that's been abandoned before the newer bits above it and to the right of it. Let's get rid of that. So you made a bit of a mess. So you think this would be a good place to go and look for something to date, and you're quite right, it certainly is. But it's very frustrating. It's very, very unusual to find anything that's been burnt. Anything that's not been burnt has rotted away virtually to thin air. So you've got to find something that's been charred in order to be able to date it, or find something that's dateable, like an inscription, or something that's got a typology like clay pipes. But of course, clay pipes are post-medieval, so you're not going to find anything medieval by looking for clay pipes. So there you go. This is the challenge we have. So let's summarize. This bit at the far western end could be pre-1500, but I can only say that because it's following the trend of recent to the east and older to the west. And it has to be pre-1500 to be medieval, if you know your history, or 1480 something. So let's have a look at what other locations are there in Chaldon. If there's no medieval workings there, could there be other places? Well, potentially, but it's not a lot of potential really, because as you can see, we've covered half the parish already. There's only this bit to the right left, and the evidence suggests that that's actually even later than this stuff, but we've no way of knowing really. So we're just homing on that. You notice immediately there's a quarry farm and a quarry hangars. But that's date that seems to be, as far as we can tell, names that have appeared because of a later working, not an early one. But it doesn't mean to say there wasn't potentially an older working somewhere there. So you can see there, Quarry Mouth. This is his first edition Ordnance Survey. So Quarry Mouth, this map dates from 1870-ish. John Aubrey, that's historian or diarist, diarist, I don't know. Anyway, he wrote something. He mentions 2 quarries at Chaldon. This is in 1670, after 1673, which, as you'll notice, is right at the end. And it's just about coincides with the most recent bit of what we've just been talking about, the bit I've highlighted in red there. That could potentially be one of those 2 quarries. We wouldn't know where the other one was. It could be another bit of the same complex that happened to be open. It could be elsewhere. We don't know because it wasn't more specific. So again, what are the references? That Magna Britannia and Cox in 1720s refers to quarry workings on White Hill. Well, that's basically this quarry hangers area there. I see White Hill Tower up there. So there's something potentially in this area, 1720s. But as I said, it's later. This gentleman, Mendes de Costa, writing in 1757, described, he called it, he's a survey of fossils or something throughout the nation. But by fossils, he meant virtually anything that was coming out the ground. So rocks and minerals and all sorts of stuff. And he talks about visiting the quarries here. Again, there were obviously something active in the 1750s. William Chapman was contracted to do a survey of the estates of the Clayton estate, which by this time, this is all part of the Clayton estate and Marden and the rest of the Godstone empire that the Claytons had built up. And one of those surveys mentions an old quarry marked on the map near Rockshore. When I first saw this, I just could not work out where the hell it was until I realised that they didn't respect north goes up on surveys, so I had to turn it around like that. And then all of a sudden, I can see this ties in. You've got the quarry, the line of quarries actually runs. It's through here like this. North is up towards Chaldon. The Chaldon parish boundary runs close to here, and the old quarry is actually there somewhere. So that was in 1760s again. So we're talking, so it says old quarry though. Bear in mind that says old quarry, which suggests it wasn't being worked. Okay, all this is pointing to this area to the east here being later. And indeed, there are extant quarry leases for all this lot in the local record office, all in those Clayton papers. Got a full list of quarry leases, most of which relate to Godstone, but a few of which refer to Chaldon. And here are the lessees of the quarries at Chaldon. Elizabeth Taylor, no, not that Elizabeth Taylor. This is 1803, she's not that old. William Steddle and William and Henry Steddle, and then William Stenning again. Stenning was a local timber merchant, by the way. He seemed to have an interest in digging stone. Later still, there's a local survey, a popular book published in 1885, which talks about old underground quarries at Quarry Farm. And then there's a Homesdale Natural History Club report visiting, that's a Reigate Society, who visited the quarry, the area, to find the entrance had been blocked. And that's how it's remained ever since, principally because it's underneath Springbottom Lane. So you're not going to be able to dig that open, pal. So where are the medieval quarry workings? Good question. Here, unlikely. There, much more likely. If we look at the man, you've got to bear in mind, if you go back to medieval times, the manor was the all important factor in who was doing what. It wasn't so much the parish, it was the manor. And this area of Chaldon parish is divided into two main manors. It's the Chaldon Manor and Willey Manor. And you can see I've put the boundaries there. They more or less follow the current roads. So you've got that the top left is a footpath, which used to be a road from Merstham to Chaldon. In the middle, you've got Hilltop Lane, which is still there. And at the right, you've got White Hill, which is still there. Those are the old manor boundaries. The Willey Manor was where the Doomsday references were. So potentially that bit that I showed that was cut off by the later workings, and which has only so far produced some horseshoes for dating. I mean, there could be older stuff in there that needs to be checked again. So yeah, Willey is could well be what we're talking about. But what can we say? I mean, what we know what we can't say just yet, but I'll tell you what we can say. We can say that this was an important source of stone, or one of a number of important sources of stone, Reigate stone in the Tudor period. And the sort of things that were being built at the time were Nonsuch Palace, which is one of Henry VIII's short-lived edifices. Massive, massive thing up near Esher, I think. Hampton Court Palace, if you go there, if you can afford it, it's bloody expensive. Hampton Court Palace has got some nice bits of Reigate stone where it hasn't been replaced by something more recent. That's Tudor work. The arching above the doorway there, intricately carved, quite impressive blocks of stone as well. So that's, and there are other bits around there as well worth checking out. The Savoy Hospital, which is all gone now, which is just to the northern end of sort of Westminster Bridge area, I believe. That was a big Reigate stone structure that went up in the Tudor period. And a lot of repairs and additions to the Tower of London, which you can go and see to this day. That's still there as well, of course. So yeah, people say Tudors didn't like stone. They wanted to use brick all the time. That's not true. They were a major user of stone. And as you can see, the Chaldon quarries were an important source of that, looking at the dating evidence. So that's where we stand in terms of what I was going to present to you. I knew full well this was going to be quite a short presentation. We're easily got plenty of time to take questions, but I'd also have another short presentation, which is not so heavy. It's more of like a whistle-stop tour of some press cuttings and anecdotes and things which I've been digging out off the internet in recent years, with some illustrations to go with them, all to do with various caves and sites in East Surrey. But so if you have more questions, please post them up. I'm happy to do that. I'll give you a minute to think. If not, then I'll get the other talk ready. Oh, sounds like I've covered everything, or you've all gone away. Can't say you've gone home because that's where you are. Okay, let's just run through this then. This is Tales from the Cave. This is a sort of oh, look, a question. Hilary Shaw, were the quarries worked out, or were there another reason for abandonment? That's a very good question. I should stop saying that. That's a horrible Americanism. That's a very good question. You ever listen to American interviews? Every bloody question that gets asked, that's a very good question, they say. This is a very good question. Were the quarries worked out, or another reason for abandonment? They were pretty much worked out, yes. There's very little ground left in that whole stretch of country that I was talking about that has not been dug. What seems to have come to the fore after the Chaldon quarries fizzled out of the Godstone workings, the earliest quarry leases that survive are 1657. The only reason they're the oldest is that's because they were the first leases which were taken over by the Claytons, and it's the Clayton estate papers that have survived. The previous manor owners' stuff hasn't, apart from these leases which were transferred. That said, the anecdotal evidence at a time in the 1890s, if you went and chatted to the locals and the people who worked the quarries, they would very specifically tell you that the quarry started in 1620. So a little bit of local hand-me-down history. So yes, they were worked out, but they were also taken, the workings, if you like, this went elsewhere. I lost the question now. Sorry, I didn't see that one. Let me just, we've got Roger Ellis. When I refer to a section of quarry cut off, do you mean all the underground, the points of access were physically obstructed? Yes, it's that's what I mean. Yes, the waste rock. So they come along, they drive a new access passage through an old area and just fill up all the galleries en route and use them as dumping grounds. So yes, that's right. Yes, indeed. So yeah, and the reason they were reopened was because of people like us going in and looking for the evidence there might be something there and putting some rocks out and finding them. Are these quarries related to the Reigate quarries? Yes, they are, in that they work the same bed of stone, were supplying the same markets, and were often called Reigate stone quarries, even though they were not in Reigate. So yes, very much so. I'll give it a couple more minutes in case anyone else wants to ask a question. Okay, let's press through this lot now. This is literally going to be showing you some pictures and reading out press cuttings and maybe making a few comments on the way. So this first story it dates from 1807. It's very short. This was published in the Public Ledger and Daily Advertiser in 1807. And as a man of the name of Bradford was going into the cave belonging to the Red Cross at Reigate a few days since to dig for sand, he took into the cave with him a man totally unacquainted with the passages and the holes. The former had been often there before, and thinking himself perfectly acquainted with his way out, and having a mind to play a joke with his companion by leaving him to grope in the dark, he put out the candle at the further end of the cave and proceeded to get out himself, while the other remained within. This, however, was not so easily accomplished, for there being a dangerous rock to ascend near the mouth of the cave, he missed his step, he fell headlong down the precipice and broke his arm. Thus he did pay most dearly for his joke. These are the part of the Red Cross sand caves from the 1980s before they were filled in and stabilised. This is one of Nick Catford's good photos and records of the site. There you go, candlelit cave in Reigate. That's Baron's Cave, mind you. This is sort of see. So let's move on to another local Reigate story. This story was widely syndicated. It hit lots and lots of papers throughout the country. The one I've grabbed it out of is the Reading Mercury, and it talks about a major mine collapse in the middle of Reigate. This is Reigate Tunnel, as it was in the 1840s, but probably didn't look much different to that in the 1850s. At the entrance to this town, from the railway station, is a tunnel 80 yards long, cut through a solid rock of silver sand. On one side are excavations used for storing ales by Messrs. Neal and Mellersh brewers, and on the other side is the entrance to a very extensive excavation of sand, approached from a pair of strong doors called the Sand Caves. This sand is extensively used in different parts of England in making glass and fine castings of metals. On Saturday evening, about 5:30, the inhabitants of the town were alarmed by a loud explosion like distant artillery, and on going to the tunnel, the strong doors of the sand cave were found on the opposite side of the tunnel, driven through a large pair of gates into the ale stores and broken. Some thought it was an explosion of gas, while others went to the meadows on top of the tunnel, and then the cause was seen. A space about 70 feet by 60 feet had fallen in. deep enough to swallow 2 large houses and roofs. About 2,000 yards of earth are sunk. This, driving the air out of the only aperture, caused the gates to be thrown to the other side of the road. A carriage had just before gone through the tunnel and providentially escaped. On going into the sand cave, the excavations all round the place fallen in were found to have filled up to the roof, and the piers left to support the earth above were nearly taken away by the force of the concussion. It's worthy of remark that this identical spot was selected for the erection of the National School, and but for the strenuous opposition of a gentleman whose grounds adjoin, the erection would have been made. Other parts of the town are excavated, and many are under the houses in the High Street. The authorities are now stirring in the matter to prevent further occurrences. No, there's no rails there, that's just wheel ruts. So this is the garden, this is the sunken garden. It's even more difficult to photograph now, it's even more overgrown. A quarter of that has been filled with what we think is garden rubbish, I believe it is anyway. That sort of bulbous bit on the right sort of takes out a corner of the big square pit. And a couple of years ago, the council get very worried because a crater started to appear in the middle of this mound of stuff. I said, well, I can't possibly be collapsing mine. It's already collapsed. So they fenced it all off and they put a borehole down, and all they came up with is soil. So I thought, right, okay, that's just a compost heap for the garden rubbish that's been there. Okay, 2 years later, 1860. Yes, the authorities were going to prevent it happening again. Ho ho. This is in May 1860. On Wednesday morning, about 12 o'clock, the inhabitants of the town were alarmed by a loud report. Oh, here we go again, they must have thought, which at first was believed to be the shock of an earthquake, but it was soon ascertained that it arose from a very large sand cave belonging to the premises of the Red Cross Inn having fallen in. Over this cave there were erected several cottages, and it was soon ascertained that no less than 5 of these cottages, or at least portions of them, including all the staircases, had fallen in with the cave. Of course, the utmost consternation prevailed, as it was a long time before it was ascertained that none of the inhabitants of the cottages, 23 in number, had gone down with the debris. The escape was perfectly miraculous. The bedsteads in 4 of the cottages were actually partly hanging over the chasm, and in one of them a poor woman was lying very ill, the medical attendant, Dr. Still, having a short time before left her. The poor creature was taken out of the front window, as may be imagined, more dead than alive from fright. The inhabitants of the adjoining cottages very soon cleared out, and they certainly had a most providential escape, for if the accident had happened at night, at a time when all the inhabitants were at home, many lives would in all probability have been sacrificed. It also happened fortunately that those who were at home were in the front part of the premises. In fact, the miraculous nature of the escapes may be imagined from the fact that no less than 10 cottages appear to be now, as it were, hanging by a thread. The only lives that were lost were those of 2 hounds that were in the garden, and they were buried in the ruins. The inhabitants of the town very kindly got a subscription in aid of the poor people who've had their furniture destroyed by this extraordinary accident. I love this picture. You can see little faces peering through the window there from the street. So this is more or less the same location in the 1980s when the caves were being filled up. So this would have been like in a hole off the cellar of one of those cottages or premises or whatever was built after those cottages collapsed. A slightly older story now. I thought I had to throw this one in. This is the Godstone Hermit. This is in 1767. Of such frivolities do rich people spend their money sometimes. A gentleman in Godstone in Surrey is erecting a hermitage or cave in his garden for a man of great fame who is to dwell therein for 7 years and to be provided with all necessaries And if the man survives after the expiration of the term, he will be allowed £100 a year. So this, by the way, is a hermitage in Hungary. I haven't got a picture of a hermitage in Godstone. I thought this will do. You can imagine some guy building a grotto in his garden saying, right, I'm going to find someone to live there for 7 years. And if he's still there in 7 years' time, he can have a pension of £100 a year. Crazy. Eccentricity at its very best. Okay, mushrooms at Godstone. This is more a set of pictures than a story, so it's a bit more visual. Mushrooms growing at Godstone started around about 1900, but it fizzled out, pretty much fizzled out by the 1930s. But we are aware that there was a very short-lived attempt at growing mushrooms in the 1940s, and fortunately, it was recorded in a journal called the Illustrated Sporting and Dramatic News, and they had sort of like a centre spread of pictures of this mushroom growing going on. It said it was entitled "Commercial Mushroom Growing in Kent Caves and Glasshouses," which obviously is not Kent, it's Surrey, but the reason will become apparent. I'll go through these one at a time. Actually, there was a bit of text. I'll read it out because it gives you the context. In the last issue, our horticultural correspondent dealt with the cultivation of mushrooms in large or small quantities using manure, blah, blah, blah. On these pages, a method of growing mushrooms on a commercial scale is illustrated. Colonel E. Noel has adopted the American method at his nurseries at St Mary Cray, Kent, and has perfected a system of packing and cropping, which is showing great promise, using caves in addition to glasshouses. So his base was in St Mary Cray, Kent, and the so-called caves are actually in Surrey. The manure used is purchased largely from London, the nearest source from which it can be obtained in sufficiently large quantities. That in it speaks in something in itself, that there was still enough horses plodding the streets of London to supply the mushroom market. So after mixing with straw, the manure is placed in the trays, which are ex-service rocket boxes, spawned, covered in soil, and kept at an even temperature for 3 weeks in dark sheds. The trays are then removed to the glass houses or to the caves, and if all goes well, 6 or 7 weeks cropping can be expected. The manure and earth is sold to gardeners after cropping. The mushroom stalks go to soup makers and hotels, and there's a ready market for the mushrooms, i.e. the caps themselves. It's important that mixing and preparation should not be carried on in the same rooms as storing for the spawn to run or cropping. The boxes should be spaced to allow air circulation. So we'll go through these images now. So this first one is the manure being mixed with straw, standing for several days. Mix it 3 or 4 times. These are the trays stacked in the spawning room, obviously here in the glass house, stacked here for 3 weeks at 75 degrees Fahrenheit for the mycelium to run. And the dates of the filling is marked on the sides of the boxes in chalk. Now, after 3 weeks, the tray should look like this. It's a good example of well-run spawn, and it's at this stage that the boxes are removed to the glass houses or to the caves. These are not smugglers at work or conspirators in an underground movement, ho, 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 but members of the staff transporting trays into the darkness of the Godstone caves. So you can see the high-tech hand trolley here, hee-hee-ho, to get the boxes, old rocket boxes full of mushroom compost into the system. Inside the caves, an effort worthy of a sensational film scene is enhanced by the lamplight. The sinister-looking tunnels are really former sandstone mines. So here you can see them carrying the rocket boxes in with their rope handles to stack them up. This is the crop that appears. Humidity is kept at 90 to 100%. At 58 degrees Fahrenheit, the crop is better than at the natural temperature of 51. But the heat was actually brought into the compost, so that it's fermenting a bit, so it's slightly warm. Rocket boxes are spacing so that one tray does not crowd another and air can circulate is imperative. The mines have the ideal temperature and humidity. So you can see actually the old military inscriptions on the side. Unfortunately, it's not clear enough to make out what they say, but they're very obviously old rocket boxes. So here we have rocket boxes bought in their thousands, an excellent use for old wartime stores. It's not clear whether these ones that have already been used or this is their stockpile. If it's a stockpile, it's a bit of a mess. Make a nice bonfire. So here we are filling the boxes with manure, pressed down by hand. If this was done on a larger scale, machinery could be used to advantage, it says. This is the spawning of the boxes. Care must be taken to ensure the right amount is used and it's correctly spaced. The spawn is rammed down and sandy soil from Chichester is used as an even covering. Oops, scrolling the wrong computer there. There's Colonel Knoll. Protection from sunlight of the last summer. I remember this is in 1948. 47 was one of those scorchingly hot summers that were spoken about until we started getting them every year. He whitewashed the entire glass house set up in order to keep the hot sun out. Otherwise, they'd have cooked the mushrooms before they grew. Mushroom growing in England seems to have started about 1900, Mr. Rosshausen. Right, last one on this little run is this is the inside the glass houses. There he is again with his leather jacket and fur collar. The interior of a cropping shed shows how the boxes are stacked. This particular crop was just coming to an end when the picture was taken. And that's a picture of, that's a curious photo, this one. It says disaster. In some of the caves used as wine stores, this peculiar growth appeared and as a whole crop was ruined by rose comb, which is this fungus here. So I guess it was too wet or something was wrong. So they had to find the right place in the various systems that was going to do what they wanted. But obviously that wasn't a particularly good place at all. Good results like these specimens in the caves are usual products of the effort of Colonel Knoll and his staff at St Mary Cray. You can actually see there the spawning dates on there, so that's on October 21st. You can almost make out the military lettering, something's probably property of or something, but again, unless you're familiar with rocket boxes, I wouldn't know what it says. Hello, Rob Hall. Have you traced records of Colonel Knoll? Was the ex-Royal Artillery given the rocket boxes? I have found a very small amount. He seems to have been based out in either in India or in Aden, somewhere out there, possibly intelligence officer. I'm not quite sure what. But only today, funny enough, today doing more internet research, I found out what his first name was, but I can't tell you what it was because I haven't got the extract to hand. But he was, funnily enough, he was listed as co-owner of the earlier 1920s, possibly earlier, mushroom farms at Godstone, along with a French gentleman, Durbeck and Knoll. So yes, he knew about Godstone. That's why he came back there, I suspect. The Lord of the Manor versus the Miller, Merstham. How are we doing for time? I've got enough time to run through this. Morning Advertiser, 1810. This is a curious story which we've had difficulty fully understanding until we got the bigger picture by doing more. It's actually online newspaper research. The miller took the estate owner, which was Jolliffe, to court to sue him for loss of water to his mill because the estate owner had opened a quarry, driven a drainage level, and lowered the water table. And that was tried at the Kingston Assizes in April 1810, and the report was Mr. Justice Heath sat about 2 hours on the Crown side and passed sentence of death on 12. By the way, this is nothing to do with it. This is the first bit of it's nice to see the whole picture at the Assizes. So there was a criminal side where he passed sentence of death on 12 people, but there was no one left whose case was thought sufficient magnitude to be left for execution. Apparently this was quite common. You'd be sentenced for death for almost anything you could think of, and then they'd commute it to transportation or hard labour or something, just to scare the bejeebers out of you, I suspect. So then on to the civil side of the Assizes, the Durrant versus Jolliffe. The Durrant was the miller. So this is a special jury case and lasted the whole day. It was an action by the plaintiff, a miller in the parish of Merstham in the county, against Hilton Jolliffe for directing the water from his mill. Mr. Garrow for the plaintiff stated the mill in question was a most ancient one, as they had a record to show it stood on the same spot as was turned by the same spring from the time of Edward the Confessor, right, until Mr. Jolliffe had directed it. The manner in which water was carried away was as follows. There were some stone quarries in the neighbourhood which Mr. Jolliffe had lately begun to work. The spring which fed the mill stream broke out of the brink of the hill about 80 or 90 yards to the east of the mill, and without any doubt it came from the east to the west, passing through the stone quarries in question. As proof of this, there was another quarry, which for distinction's sake he would call the old quarry further to the east, and he should call witnesses to prove that whenever the water came into that quarry, it flowed away to the west and filled the mill stream. So the quarrymen, whenever they found the water coming, they always congratulated the miller on his approaching supply of water, and the fact has invariably justified them. When Mr. Jolliffe began to work his new quarries, which lay between the old quarries and the mill, and began driving a driftway from north to south, the plaintiff foresaw he must tap the spring and divert the water, and in this apprehension he gave Mr. Jolliffe formal notice of the mischief which he thought would ensue. He, however, persisted until, in the month of April last, what had been foreseen actually happened. They found a large body of water in the quarry which ran off via its tunnel, and from that moment the mill stream decreased and at length became totally dry. The fact of the water having ceased in the mill stream as soon as it broke out, the quarry being established by a great number of witnesses, Mr. Sergeant Best for the defendant made an able defence, and Mr. Garrow, in as able a reply, insisted on the superior weight of the fact against the speculation of philosophers. It's a bit like counting election votes in America, isn't it? The learned judge having summed up the evidence with great precision, the jury found for the plaintiff. So there you go, the miller won, and the court records show that he was awarded, I can't remember, it was £70 plus costs, I think, whatever. But then in June, because he had the money and he knew that he had the influence, it went to appeal, and this time it went to the King's Bench. And the further, to cut a long story short because it is quite long, this is Merstham again, and actually shows the mill. So we got a repeat of the story again, this time in front of the King's Bench. But Lord Ellenborough, who was the judge, said the question was almost novel and certainly of a serious nature. It was whether a tenant were equally entitled to use of the water, subterraneous and superficial. However, he would, without going further, first recommend the parties should come to a compromise and that Colonel Jolliffe should buy the miller's right to the stream in question, which is actually what happened. So you find in the Kingston Assizes, there's this award for £70, and then you find in the local vicar's diary that it was £2,200. You think, well, they can't both be right, but it turns out indeed they were, because the report in the vicar's notes was of the Mr. Jolliffe buying out the miller rather than accept the judgment of the Court of the King's Bench. So he basically said, okay, I'm keeping my quarry tunnel. You can't have your stream, but here's your compensation, £2,200. with which I believe he promptly went down to went to Sussex and built a mill at Ifield, which was opened by a miller of the same name at about the same time. So yes, he took the money and built a new mill somewhere else. I don't blame him. Apparently the Jollies were particularly litigious people, always arguing with their neighbours and tenants. So this is the flooded quarry as it is today. And there it is again, as it is today. Because as soon as the quarry closed, the tunnel was blocked up and it flooded up again. And this, we believe, is one end of the drainage tunnel. It's in exactly the right place and is a curious, low side passage at the deepest part of the flooded quarry, disappearing off to one side with a stone lining. So very fortunate that this was photographed by some rather brave ladies and gentlemen who went diving there. And this is what this quarry was actually open for. This is the Strand Bridge. Later, it was soon to become the Waterloo Bridge when it was opened in 1815. And although the outer stone of this was a durable granite or similar, the heart of this bridge was Reigate stone, and it was the contractors for this bridge were Jolliffe and Banks, who were the people who were operating the quarry. The construction period of this bridge almost ties it almost exactly with the opening dates of the quarry. So it looks very much like this bridge was the main market for that particular quarry. And there we have it. So I have finished my presentation. Any further questions?
Okay. Well, Peter, thank you very much for a very informative presentation. I'd like to remind everybody else of our forthcoming presentations. And if you're not a member, come and join us. And if you want to give a presentation, send me an email. Peter, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye, everybody. Good night.
Thanks for listening.